Thanks for those that have led us in worship this morning, for taking part. It's good that we can still gather, isn't it, as church, and other people can be involved in our Sunday services. Everywhere you look in life, there's battle, isn't there? Shops are fighting for your custom, and they will compete over prices, and they'll compete over sales, and all to get us through the doors or to get us online, as it is at the moment maybe, to buy their products. During the coronavirus, people have been battling for different things from supermarkets. People have been battling for toilet rolls and hand wash and flour and all of these other things that we usually take for granted. We never thought, did we, that we would be battling for toilet rolls. Politicians have been doing battle for at least the last 4 years over the right Brexit deal that we can have. And now they're doing battle about how best to deal with the situation of the coronavirus. Look at cartoons. Tom and Jerry, I'm sure you remember them, they've been doing battle for 80 years. There's a kids' film called Captain Underpants. Sounds a great film, doesn't it? It's a really good film. I'd encourage you to watch that if you like cartoons. But it's called Captain Underpants, and the two main characters are two kids, and the whole premise of the film is them doing battle with their headmaster. We didn't do battle with the headmaster in my day because we would have been in serious trouble. But I wonder how many of you as parents do battle with your kids over things such as screen time and what they're allowed to watch, and when they're allowed out, how late they're allowed to stay out, and are they allowed to wear this and wear that? Have they done their homework, and so on and so forth? Maybe at the moment you feel like you're doing battle with homeschooling during this crisis. People do battle to make their finances, just to make ends meet. On Friday, we celebrated 75 years of VE Day. And while that was a day of celebration all those years ago, that celebration came after nearly 6 years of intense battle. Battle is all around us, friends. Often unconsciously, we battle every day with some of the things that I've just mentioned, but also lots of other things. But the Bible tells us there's a spiritual battle going on all around us all the time. And make no mistake, this spiritual battle has huge impact upon our lives. And so we have 2 sermons left in our Finding Freedom series. And I just want to encourage you to hang on in there. We're nearly there. We've done 5. We've got 6 today and number 7 next week. And I hope you've been finding them helpful and beneficial as you see the different battles that we face in life and the enemies, the giants that we have to defeat, because we're doing all of this basically just to live the lives that God has for us, because God, our Heavenly Father, He just wants us to live lives of freedom. So let's look again at our passage, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through to 6. We read, "When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mightier than yourselves. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction." That's quite a strong way to put this, isn't it? But we are to devote ourselves to destroying the enemies that would seek to stop us living the life that God has intended for us. And you see, to devote yourself to something suggests that you are consumed with it. It's everything that you are. It suggests that you have a real passion for it. And it raises a question for us. This particular translation from the English Standard Version. Are we devoted to lives of following God? Are we devoted to doing all we can? Do we have a passion to find the freedom that God has for us? Because this is what this passage is saying. It's suggesting that we need to be passionate. We need to be consumed. We need to be devoted to living lives of freedom that God has for us. And that in itself is going to be a battle. We carry on. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons or taking their daughters for your sons. For they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. You see, friends, this is the problem with all of these enemies that we've been looking at these last couple of months. They have one sole purpose, and that is to stop us living a life for God. It's to draw us away from God. Each enemy uses a different tactic, but they're united in wanting to draw us away from God. And so we need to stand strong in our faith now, maybe more than ever, and do battle so that that does not happen in our lives. We read on. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he would destroy you quickly. But thus shall you deal with them. You shall break down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and chop down their Asherim and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Friends, in this version, this passage is called a chosen people. And I just pray that you would know above all things, above all else today, that you are a chosen person, that you are a treasure of the living God, and you are a son or a daughter of him. And he just wants you to live the best life. You know, we're living our best life when we're living as God would have us live. And that means living in the freedom that he has for us. So we fight for our freedom, we battle, and we move on with enemy number 6, and that's the Hivites. Now bear with me, because I'm going to very quickly rattle off a brief history of the Hivites to put it all into context, to give us a little bit of understanding of who it is we're dealing with and where they came from. So here we go. Hang on in there. The Hivites were a nation that descended from Canaan, son of Ham, son of Noah. The first time they play an active role in the Bible is when Shechem the Hivite raped Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, and full-blood sister of Simeon and Levi. Now the brothers Simeon and Levi, they're pretty annoyed about this. They're pretty cheesed off. They get revenge on the people who lived in that city, also called Shechem, by getting the men to circumcise themselves and then killing all the males while they were weakened. Now, if you're wondering, well, how does circumcision weaken somebody? Well, if you're a man and you've just been circumcised, trust me, you're not going to be on top of your game. You're going to feel a little bit battered and a little bit sore. And it was right in that moment that they struck. Now, Jacob is furious that the brothers have done this, because it just put fuel on the fire. It angered their neighbours. And instead of seeking to bring peace to a situation that was already fractious, it made it even worse. And so their actions cost them their second and third born status as Jacob's sons, because when Jacob gives out his final blessing, he gives it to Judah, their younger brother, instead of them. And the descendants of Simeon and Levi were condemned to be dispersed in Israel without any land of their own. And then if that wasn't enough, while Jacob and his family were trying to deal with the Hivite problem, Jacob's brother Esau, he saw a woman, he saw Aholibamah, the Hivite, he saw her and he took her for himself as a wife. When the Israelites escaped Egypt and made it to Canaan, the Hivites were firmly by then established as one of the 7 Canaanite nations whose complete destruction God promised, which is what we're talking about in this series. Now, when Joshua and the Israelite army then attacked, the nations of Canaan united into a sort of coalition. But the men of the Hivite city of Gibeon, they tricked Israel into saving them by saying, look, we'll just, you can take us as your slaves and we'll serve you. You don't need to get rid of us. We'll help you in life because we will be able to serve your every whim, as it were. And that's an important point to note because it speaks of the tactics that this Hivite enemy uses. The coalition still containing those remaining Hivites counterstruck with a huge army, but eventually almost all of them were slain and almost all their cities were taken. Now, this very brief, and I appreciate it's a very brief potted history here, it shows us two things that I want to briefly mention. Firstly, it shows us what happens when the enemies that God hands to us aren't fully defeated. You know, when we allow a small portion, a small amount of the enemy to remain in our lives, it can cause utter chaos and destruction. See, God told them not to intermarry, and yet they did. God told them not to enter a treaty with them, and yet they did. And God told them to completely destroy them, yet they didn't. And so because of that, they had years and years of struggle. It's a bit like if you don't get all the weeds from your garden, eventually those weeds will continue to grow. And if you don't deal with them once and for all, there will always be a problem to you. And, you know, last week we talked about one of the tools for defeating the Perizzite enemy was that God knows best. And in fact, we could use that across across the board of all of these enemies because God knows best. We may not always understand it, but God knows best. Very often the struggles we have is when we simply don't do what God tells us to do. The second point to note from this very brief history lesson is that the actions of the Hivites point to the character and nature of them as an enemy. Notice the first time the Bible mentions them is when Shechem the Hivite rapes Dinah. Then Esau marries a Hivite. Presumably, she was a very attractive and a alluring woman because he knows he shouldn't go after her. He knows he shouldn't marry her, but he just can't resist her. He gives in to his desires. And so it shows us that the Hivite nation, there are people that were led by the flesh and they're cunning because they tricked the Israelites into having them as slaves. And so our brief history shows us that the Hivites, they were sneaky, they were deceptive, they're out for number one, and no matter what they tell you, their main aim is to please themselves. And so the Hivite is a selfish spirit that is only interested in you if you can give it what it wants. And it tricks us into living life this way, into a life that says you can have everything you want. Live it up, baby, because you deserve it. You know, if you like this enemy, it's the L'Oreal of all giants, of all the enemies, because it says you're worth it. That's a L'Oreal advert, isn't it? You can have everything that you want because you're worth it. And then the lady flicks her hair back, and many of us are getting longer hair, and we can all flick our hair at the moment, can't we? But you know, this is the L'Oreal of spirits, the L'Oreal of enemies. Do exactly as you please. Go after whatever it is that you want, because do you know what? The enemy tells you, you deserve it. And that's where it tricks us. That's where it deceives us. That's where it takes hold. Now, the name Hivite means villager. And some of you are thinking, hang on a minute, isn't that the same as last week when we looked at the Perizzite? There are similarities with the Perizzite. So a lot of what we said last week applies to this enemy as well. But there's one major difference. The Perizzite thinks small and has limited vision, full stop. Never goes outside the village. In contrast, the Hivite, while also a villager, also has limited vision, but by the things he limits his life with. You see, the Hivite loves all things of the world. It's a living it up kind of life. Someone with the Hivite spirit will be seen maybe even in an affluent society where every kind of human and worldly pleasure is on offer, and they seek, their goal in life is to indulge in it all because they have the money to do so, and they're not interested in anything else. Their vision is limited only to pleasure. Very often this lifestyle is funded by wealthy parents or inheritance, and they believe they're living life to the full. They believe they deserve all of these pleasures, but they're not. Because they're limiting their lives only to pleasure, only to the things of the world. And that's often masking struggles that are going on in their lives. You see, Hivites turn into people with very limited long-term ambitions in life. All they want to do is travel around the world and have a good time. It's interesting to note that this Hivite spirit is also common in people who have retired. Now, maybe I've got some of your attention this morning and you think, how dare he say that to me? You know, such people are prone to believe when they've retired that they have nothing else to do in life but relax and enjoy the wealth that they've accumulated in their lives. I can see maybe some of you thinking, well, why shouldn't I be able to do that? In one sense, friends, it's okay to do a little bit of that. Why shouldn't you go on really nice holidays where there's not a kids club and loads of kids shouting and screaming everywhere? Why shouldn't you be able to go into restaurants where what's on the menu is not fish fingers and chicken nuggets? No problem with that either. The problem comes when in retirement you live all out for those things and not God's vision for your life. When you make doing as you please the main priority in life, you allow the Hivite spirit to kind of dictate the decisions you make. It can be just as easy for those in retirement to be drawn away from God as it is for those who are younger. Some of you are thinking, don't worry, it's okay. The kids may be grown up, but they're still living with me. Some of you might be thinking, don't worry, no chance of going to a restaurant where they don't have fish fingers and chicken nuggets because we have the grandchildren all the time. You know, maybe that's God's way of keeping this Hivite spirit at bay from yourself. But seriously, no matter who we are, this enemy can attack all of us. We're not immune from its tactics. Many of you will know the parable of the farmer who scattered seed. Some seed fell on the path, some fell on the rock, some fell amongst thorns, and the others fell on good soil. And when Jesus is explaining this passage in Luke, and he's talking about the seed that fell upon the thorns, he said this: the seed that falls into the weeds represents the hearts of those who hear the word of God, but their growth is quickly choked off by their own anxious cares, the riches of this world and the fleeting pleasures of this life. This is why they never become mature and fruitful. Friends, this is the Hivite spirit in action. It literally chokes our faith. It stunts our growth. It gets us to focus on the riches of the world, on the pleasures that are fleeting in the world. And when we do that, we don't grow, we don't mature in our faith because we're allowing this enemy spirit of looking at riches, looking at things of the world to become the dominant, deciding, the directing factor in our life. And so as we think about this, I want to draw our attention to two Bible readings that they're not linked, but I want us to notice something common running throughout both of them. Firstly, we read from Matthew chapter 6. We read, "Don't hoard treasure down here where it gets eaten by moths and corroded by rust or worse, stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven where it's safe from moth and rust and burglars." It's obvious, isn't it? The place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being. Your eyes are windows into your body. If you open your eyes wide in wonder and belief, your body fills up with light. If you live squinty-eyed in greed and distrust, your body is a dank cellar. I love the way it says that. If you pull the blinds on your windows, what a dark life you will have. You can't worship two gods at once. Loving one God, you'll end up hating the other. Adoration of one feeds contempt for the other. You can't worship God and money both. And then from Luke chapter 15, for many, this will be well known. It's a portion of the parable of the lost son. I'm not going to read it all. I'm just going to read verses 11 to 16. We read, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this young son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land and he began to starve. He persuaded the local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. For the rest of our time this morning, I want us to notice something in common about these 2 passages, and my hope and prayer is it will help us understand something of the Hivite spirit and help us to defeat this enemy and to live more fulfilling lives of freedom for God. You see, what is the one thing that we could say is in both of these passages that is the downfall of the human being? Very simply, it's the eye. In the passage from Matthew, we hear Jesus telling his audience that the eye is the window to the whole body. In other words, our eyes, what we see, affects and directs our lives. And so if we see treasure that is worldly as the be-all and end-all in life, then that's going to destroy us because it will never satisfy. Jesus says you cannot serve God and money, for if you do, it will kill you. It will totally destroy you. In the parable of the lost son, what was it that started the son on his downward spiral? It was his eye. He saw all of the wealth that his father had. He saw the lifestyle that his father had. He saw his bank balance. He saw his money. He saw what he could do with that money. And instead of working for it, instead of being honourable to his father, he thought, what can I do with all of this money? So he saw what his father had. He saw what was in the world, and he put 2 and 2 together and realised what he could do if he got his hands on all of that money. The Hivite enemy gets us to see the world and all that it has to offer, and it tricks us into believing that is what life's about. If we get all of that, then we'll be complete. You can see it play out in children. When our children are really young, we often say, don't we don't need to buy them lots of expensive gifts because we can buy them loads of expensive gifts for Christmas and birthdays and the like, and yet they end up playing with the box. Why don't we just buy them a box? They'd be happy if we did that. But then children go to school and they're affected by other children because they talk about the latest fads, the in trainers, the games that they play. There are even certain hair clips that are the right hair clips to have. And before you know it, you have a child who sees all of these things in the world and wants them. And when you've tried to maybe palm them off with something cheaper or something unbranded, within them, if you like, the Hivite spirit screams, no, I want the real hair clip. I want the trainers with the right name on them, the right label, and so on and so forth. Why do they do that? Why do we all do that? Because they have seen. It's their eyes. They can see what's out there in the world. And the Hivite spirit convinces them if they have those things, then their lives are going to be better for it. But you see, Jesus tries to save us from this Hivite spirit by telling us something about the things of the world. He says, friends, they won't last. He tells us in the passage from Matthew that the treasures on earth will rust and destroy, or worse, get stolen by burglars. They're not going to last. The son, once his money had run out, he had nothing. All of his friends walked away. He was just absolutely at rock bottom. All because he had followed the things of the world. You see, the Hivite spirit won't tell you that all the things of this world are temporary, and yet Jesus tries to save us from a whole lot of pain by telling us that the pleasures of the world are not what we need to go after. A few years ago, as a family, we were in Yorkshire and we went to Whitby and we had Whitby fish and chips. Now, if you've ever had Whitby fish and chips, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They were amazing. They were the best fish and chips we've ever had. Kezia, our daughter, she was literally licking the box that the fish and chips, it wasn't very attractive, that the fish and chips came in, and if I had said to her, do you want another portion, she would have got those and eaten all those herself. They were so good that we were worried about having fish and chips ever again because they wouldn't be as nice, in case they weren't as nice as those ones in Whitby. The kids still talk about Whitby fish and chips, and this was 3 years ago. They were amazing. They got our taste buds bursting. A lovely sensation in our mouth. There was a happiness that they brought to us. Whoa, there was the noises you make when you're eating something nice from all four of us. But it didn't last. About 15 minutes after me buying them, they were gone. A teeth clean later, even the taste was all gone. Now, the reality is I can't live for Whitby fish and chips. And if I did, I'd be living for the things of the world and I'd be limiting my life. Now, friends, I'm not, and I don't believe Jesus is saying, don't have nice things now and then. Nothing wrong with nice things, but don't make the nice things of this world the main thing in your life. For when you do, you limit your life, and Jesus says there is so much more when we live with and for him. You see, this is the tension that the Hivite spirit tries to deceive us into. It tries to get us to see that the nice things of this world, that is the main thing. That's what we need to go after, and we worship them and not God. So our eyes can be our downfall if we live for what we see in the world, for living what is temporary, that will not last, but when we live for that, it limits our lives. Now, as we're slowly bringing this to a close, the tool for overcoming the enemy giant is the tool of contentment. And you pick up the tool of contentment when you allow your eyes to focus not on the things of the world, but to focus on Jesus. In Revelation, we can read, can't we, that whether God say that if we're lukewarm, he'll spit us out of his mouth. What he's saying is, you want a bit of me and you want a bit of the world, but that doesn't work. So he says, stop cheating on me with the world and give all of yourself to me. Many of you will know the story in the Bible where Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on water. Wow, what a surreal experience. And he's looking at Jesus. He's looking him square in the eye and all is well. But when he takes his eyes off Jesus and he focuses on the waves, on what's around him, that is when splish splash he's sinking. That's when he's gulping down water and fearing for his life. Paul tells us in Philippians what contentment is. In Philippians chapter 4, we read, I'm glad in God, far happier than you would ever guess. Happy that you're again showing such strong concern for me. Not that you ever quit praying and thinking about me. You just had no chance to show it. Actually, I don't have a sense of needing anything personally. I've learned by now to be quite content whatever my circumstances. I'm just as happy with little as with much as with little. I found the recipe for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. Whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the one who makes me who I am. I don't mean that your help didn't mean a lot to me. It did. It was a beautiful thing that you came alongside me in my troubles. Friends, Paul is saying his best life has nothing to do with what he has. His best life has nothing to do with a full bank balance and an abundance of food in the cupboards. His best life is not chasing the things of the world. His best life, his contentment comes when his eye is focused on Jesus. You know, this virus has shown us that God is still God, regardless of whether we can get the same brand of toilet paper that we always get. God is still God, regardless of whether or not we can get the bread that we really like. But interestingly, I wonder how many of you have got angry at not being able to get what you wanted in the shops. Okay, maybe not angry, but slightly worked up. I did when doing an online shop last Tuesday because I couldn't get what I wanted. How silly is that? On Friday, we celebrated 75 years since VE Day. And what we have faced and what we've been able to get it pales in insignificance to what was going on and what people went through during the Second World War. You see, this is because the Hivite spirit convinces us convinces us that the things of the world are important, but also it convinces us that we're entitled to the things of the world. The Hivite enemy gets us to see what's in the world and gets our hearts to want it, to go after it with everything that we are. And yet the tool of contentment in Jesus defeats this enemy. For when you know the contentment that Jesus offers, you don't allow your eye to wander. You see, the Hivite enemy would tell us that the things of the world will give us a full life. Yet contentment in Jesus will enable us to live life in all its fullness. There's a big difference between those two things. Let me say that again. The Hivite enemy would tell us that the things of the world would give us a full life. And yet contentment in Jesus will enable us to live life in all its fullness. You see, this tool is the complete opposite of the Hivite spirit. And so instead of chasing after the things of the world, especially worldly pleasures, and doing what we want, when we want, and to who we want, and actually always chasing the next thing, and so we're never fulfilled. When we change direction and chase after Jesus, and we do that by changing our focus, changing what we see, when we do that, we pick up the tool of contentment. That passage we read from Matthew talks about allowing our eye to be opened in wonder and belief. It's seeing Jesus. It's shifting our gaze from the things of the world to be firmly looking at Jesus. And when we firmly look at Jesus, we'll know what contentment is. And so, friends, focus your heart on that, and you will live a full life of unlimited freedom as you break out from the constraints of worldly pleasures. Let's just pray together. Father, I just want to thank you that you never leave us and you never leave us on our own, and that you equip us to fight all the arrows, all of the struggles that the enemy would chuck at us. And Father, we come to you this morning and we think of this Hivite enemy, this giant, this enemy spirit that seeks to destroy us, to drag us down, to get us to shift our focus from you and to focus on things of the world and these these worldly pleasures, gets us to live a hedonistic lifestyle and to chase after the next big thing and to chase after all of these things that would give us pleasure. Father, may we not be fooled by it, but may we rest and remain in you. May we allow our eyes to change, to change focus, and to not focus on all of that stuff, but to focus firmly on you and know what that tool of contentment truly means in our lives. Father, if any of us are going through this right now, save us from feelings of being overwhelmed. Save us from feelings of we're not good enough. We can never come back to you because you always make a way. That's what the cross did. That cross always is a way open for us to come back to you. So Father, right now, if anybody is listening or watching this, that has been following the things of the world, and they know they've taken their eye off the ball, they know they've taken their eye off you. Yeah, Father, give them the courage and the faith and the love to come back to you. Father, this week, just help us to keep our eyes firmly focused on you and to be contented because of our relationship with you, not because of the things of the world. Bless you. Thank you, Father. Amen.